On the anniversary of the Red October Revolution, the 7th of November 1945, the Soviet NKVD officer explained to us through his translator that the German wehrmacht had ceased to exist. He further explained that hereafter there would be no officers among us, and that in the future we were to repay through our labor the war damage inflicted upon Russia by the fascists. In coordination with this declaration, we were required to remove all officers' insignia from our uniforms, including shoulder boards and collar tabs. Any medals and badges were to be confiscated, an order having been given to collect and turn in to the authorities any devices that were intended to glorify fascism. This order was hardly necessary, as all medals and badges had long since been stripped from the prisoners by the Soviet soldiers in their endless pursuit of souvenirs or items of trade. With this final order to remove insignia of rank, it was clear to us that we had been stripped of any rights and were at the total mercy of our captors. Any reference to rights of prisoners through the Hague Convention was useless. Along with the old prisoners were Christian Burkhard from Wernersberg, Emil Glatz from Ebhausen, and others from the area of my hometown. One Sunday morning I attempted to organize a small choral group with these men. This displeased the Antifa group in the camp, who considered this effort a threat to their authority, and I was thus denounced as an escape risk. During the subsequent search of my belongings, the Russians found a tiny compass needle buried deep within a roll of socks. Theoretically, this needle could have been mounted on a small splinter of wood to indicate magnetic north for an escape attempt through the swamps, and as punishment for this infraction, I was to be placed in solitary confinement for an indefinite period of time. A passageway through the officers' barracks was divided by walls to form a space approximately 2 meters by 2 meters in size. The entrance to this cell was secured by a wide door nailed together from heavy planks, which could be barred from the outside by an iron rod. When the rod was slid into the secure position, the door could not be opened from the interior of the cell. Once a day I was led from the cell to be given a slice of damp bread and a cup of thin cabbage soup. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the coming of winter, and the cell remained cold throughout the days and nights, despite the presence of a large iron stove that was missing a door. This oven had probably been used to heat the barracks before the construction of the isolation cell. However, we were not permitted to use it for warmth. During one of my short respites from the cell, Christian Burkhard met me near the latrine and slipped me several splinters of firewood, along with a tiny amount of tinder material, a flint, and a rough piece of steel, with which I could light a small fire. I stuck the material into an inner pocket of my breeches, unnoticed by the escorting guard, who did not discern anything out of the ordinary, as I had already been deprived of my belt and was required to hold up my pants by the waist. Thus I was provided the opportunity to light a small fire in the doorless oven. After several minutes of rest in luxurious warmth, I fell asleep on the floor next to the stove. A short time later I awakened, choking on smoke that filled the cell and gasping for oxygen. A small piece of burning wood had fallen from the stove and ignited the floor of the cell, and I was now in danger of asphyxiation. Luckily, a large number of prisoners who had been stricken with diarrhea were forming a steady stream of traffic to and from the latrines. I rolled over to the door of the cell, and through the crack between the door and the floor, I deeply inhaled fresh air. Then I began to yell, "Fire!" I was soon pulled unconscious from the smoke-filled cell with singed clothes and minor burns, and the fire was extinguished with snow water. When I awoke at midday, I was surprised to find myself on my old bunk in the barracks, the building empty, as the occupants had been mustered out on a labour party. One of the guards, whom we called One Eye, due to his cross-eyed appearance, soon led me at bayonet point from the camp to the commandant's office. In the dim room I was greeted ominously by 2 men of the Antifa group, a German-Polish prisoner who served as translator, and the German and Russian camp medical officers. The latter was a Jewish doctor from Leningrad. Also present was the political officer and his ever-present female attendant. The hearing was presided over by the commandant, and it was explained to me that I faced the serious charges of arson, sabotage, and attempted destruction of Soviet property, and that I could expect severe punishment for these grave offences. My referral to the Hague Convention and the relevant conditions for the handling of prisoners of war with international rights gave me the opportunity to explain further to the commander what had occurred. I told him that sleep deprivation, combined with solitary confinement in freezing weather, without heat or warm clothing, could only be considered inhumane treatment. Therefore, I had taken the liberty of lighting a fire to prevent freezing to death. I spoke of the lack of nourishment that had been experienced by the prisoners, and in closing I remarked that if my death had already been determined, then as a military officer I should be afforded a bullet. With this remark a great uproar ensued among those present. At length the translator relayed to me that the commandant had proclaimed that no more German officers will die in Russian camps. I was immediately escorted under guard to the camp kitchen, where I was provided a double ration of soup and bread. The work details were dispatched into the snow-covered forests, where trees were felled by hand. All the labour in the forests was conducted without the benefit of machinery. The trees were cut with axes and cross-cut saws. The trunks were then split with mauls and wedges. The sparse rations could not provide enough nourishment for our bodies to enable us to conduct such strenuous labour, and we soon experienced the first deaths. The ground at the perimeter of the camp was frozen to the consistency of concrete, and it was necessary to drag the corpses to the softer soil of the swamps for burial. Here we would scrape away the covering of snow and lay the dead to rest. During these burial details I sought out patches of wild cranberries under the ice, which provided a needed, albeit sparse, source of vitamins. Among the dead was Sorotti. This was not his family name. However, he was from a well-known Hanseatic business family and had managed the Sorotti chocolate factory in North Germany. His bunk was located directly beneath me in the barracks, and one morning I awoke to find him lying with his head cocked to one side, a small rivulet of dried blood on his chin. We dragged him to the swamp for burial along with several others who had died during the night. The ranks of the dead continued to climb, among them the teacher Hermann from Onstmettingen, the young Drescher from Endringen, and others. During the winter of 1945 to 1946, one of every 3 prisoners from our camp made the final journey to the makeshift cemetery. On one warm spring day, Hauptmann Hermstruer, Oberleutnant Heck, and Oberleutnant Schreiber, along with 2 others, attempted to escape, despite their weakened condition. We had previously discussed the possibility of slipping through the deep ruts created by the supply truck, which led under the gate, directly before the eyes of the guards. This small group had slipped under the gate and broken into a supply hut to obtain additional rations for the escape, before stealing soundlessly into the forest. The ground was still covered with snow, and their attempt was clearly an act born of desperation. All of us were fully aware that under the current conditions, we would soon die of exhaustion, disease, or malnutrition in the desolate camp. 3 days later, Heck and Schreiber returned. They were paraded before the mustered ranks of prisoners, badly beaten and covered with blood. Their threadbare uniforms hung from their emaciated bodies in tatters. "This is what happens to those who attempt an escape," we were told.